Well, here we are again, Badge of Honour. I'm Alan Curry. And if you've been watching the previous episodes, you'll have heard me talk about my early life, parental upbringing, how I joined the police service, what some of my inspirations were. And I've been asked to sort of describe a little bit of how I actually managed to get to the rank of Chief Superintendent. I suppose there's your own personal values. I always wanted to challenge myself. If you put the rank structure in place, I joined as a PC, and the ranks I went through were Sergeant, Inspector, Chief Inspector, Superintendent, and Chief Superintendent. And each one of those ranks has different roles and responsibilities, but each one of those can teach you things to allow you to move to the next rank once you've been able to hit a level of competency. And I never wanted to move on till I felt I knew the job that I was doing or competent. So it's always been in myself to want to progress, to want to learn. I still learn now. I always say you never learn it. And of course, I will qualify this by going back to what my father says. Self-praise is no recommendation. So please take what I'm saying with it. This is not, I'm the greatest. It's just what I was, what I am, because in the way we've moved forward. So each one has a different responsibility. As a sergeant, I had 8 people to look after. As an inspector, I had 20. As a chief inspector, I had 100 and odd. And as I moved forward, I finished off with 500 staff. Now it's really hard to have all those people but each one of the roles and ranks I wanted to achieve competency in, and that really helped me move forward and progress. And I mentioned in an earlier episode that to be a leader, you have to have followers. And there's a certain amount of respect comes from being a leader with followers. And one of the things I always found very interesting, if we are talking about leadership, was I never changed my personality no matter what day I went to work. Like everybody else, I had children, I had a wife, maybe not all things went well at home, but my officers and my staff only ever saw me as Alan Curry, because I felt if they knew how they could work with me and what I could do with them, for them and together, they knew how they could then do the job. So we've worked about the early parts of me doing the job, but I wanted my officers to do the job the way I saw it was done. They were doing my job 20 years ago. They believed in the community, they wanted to help people, they wanted to do the job correctly, and they knew if they did the job correctly that they were always going to get my support. So that's my motivation as I progressed, and my attitude, and probably we've got to go back to family, haven't we? You know, that's what my parents taught me, to be as good as you can be, but not to strive necessarily for money. Money's always a nice sort of aspect to it, but it wasn't the key motivation. It was about personal development. And within that sort of thing, bear in mind I mentioned early on that I didn't pass my 11+. I did further education. I taught myself. I read books and I watched others. I've said earlier on, you get good habits taught, but some are caught. And I caught an awful lot of good behaviour from people I worked with and for, and that put me in good stead. So you continually learn. I wanted to learn, I wanted to be ambitious, and then the next step is, I never wanted to be the best. I wanted to be the best person I could be, and I wanted to be the best commander I could be. And if I could be as good as I can be, the people behind could be their best without any hindrance or fear of failure. Everybody, I quite like a book called The 1 Minute Manager, and one of the things he always said, or the writer said, catch people doing things right. It's easy to catch people doing things wrong. That's not a problem. But it's about catching people doing things right, and they always remember it. You know, I said about my father, he never gave me much praise, but I always knew he was proud and praising me. Well, I made sure my staff knew when they'd done a good job, they were spoken to, and I went to see them. I didn't sit in an office, but they were some of the habits I caught of other leaders who I respected and dealt with. And I've got to go back to my final word. Part of me being where I was and what I was from the people I worked with, my own upbringing, my personal style, and my desire to learn and to be as good as I can be. Maybe not the best, but as good as I personally could be. I mentioned before the rank structure and how I developed and moved on, hopefully to my standards, but My first promotion was to be a sergeant. Now, it was very unusual for people to get promoted around 5-6 years. I didn't get promoted till 12 years, which was quite late. But I'd been doing my best learning the job, and I got promoted to Jarrow as a sergeant. And now I've got responsibility for other officers, and we had some fine officers there. But not everybody wanted to be a leader. There were some great operators within that community who actually didn't aspire to be a sergeant, an inspector, or moving on. Yes, we always say money would have been nice, but they always were able, the wages were getting better. But some of these individuals, they were striving within the role they were doing. They were permanently trying to be the best they could be for the organisation and themselves. And I think one of the things that was noticeable for me being a sergeant, watching those things, because I was striving slightly differently because I wanted to be a sergeant and I wanted to challenge myself in that role. But I also recognised, more than I did when I was part of the team, that some of my members who made the team and who I had responsibility for were actually as good, and in some ways, if not better, than some of the skill set I had. But what they didn't particularly want to do was take on some of the areas or responsibilities for promotion. But those officers were the salt of the earth in relation to the work they did, pillars of community, been in the area for a long time, knew everybody, could walk down the street, and their ambition and desire was to be as good as they could be within that role. So not everybody can be a leader, not everybody can get promoted, but that doesn't diminish the fact of the job that gets done from the perspective of an individual recognising the values and objectives of the organisation, putting their heart and soul in achieving those objectives, and doing it for both the organisation, for themselves, and from that a recognition, because they were recognised, of their worth in the role that they were doing on behalf of the people we were serving. Yet, I suppose the message that I learned from being the sergeant was, not everybody's going to be a sergeant, not everybody's going to be an inspector, but a lot of those officers progressed within themselves, within the organisation. They didn't hold rank or responsibility, but they were some of the officers I went to for advice and guidance. So not everybody can be a leader, not everybody wants to be, but that doesn't diminish the fact that some fantastic people do not take on the responsibility or role, they take on that personal responsibility and the organisational objectives and the way in which we can do and help people in the community. Salt of the earth. I love working with them. I learned a lot from them, and you never stop learning. Just because you have responsibility for individuals doesn't mean to say that they can't teach you as well as I could teach them. It's a cross-section of skills, a cross-section of skill sets, but it's how you complement each other to a common goal and objective. And these people were great. I can even think of one individual officer who actually, his part-time job, and not a job, he had a role helping out his disabled mother who had an antique shop, and they called him Jack, so it's not going to mean anything, Jack. Jack could go anywhere in Jarrow. He could do anything, he could talk to anybody, he knew everybody. And he was, we mentioned very early on Dixon and Dog Green and people like that. He was your original community police officer who knew everybody, and he'd been at Jarrow for years, and he was one of the most competent officers I've ever met in my service. But he didn't want to be a sergeant. But honestly, if I needed to know anything or speak about people or even learn about certain ways to do the job differently, I'd go to Jack and he'd just say, okay Alan, have you tried this or have you tried that? Back to some of the things I've said. Good habits are taught, but they're also caught. And you can never stop learning from your peers, and you never stop learning from people you work with on a daily basis. And I had as much respect, and always will have respect, for Jack. He was what policing is all about. I mentioned Jack there, who had all the skills necessary, but as a sergeant, I had a few, because it took me 12 years to be a sergeant. So some of my staff were learning different things. And I remember On one particular occasion, we had a burglary in the Fellside area of Jarrow South Shields. And what I used to do, personally as a PC and definitely as a sergeant, as police officers, we had and probably still have a habit of driving quickly to the scene. If it's a burglary or people have run away, then we end up in a situation where we drive around the streets for a while and then we leave. Maybe 5-10 minutes. Well, I used to park the Panda up in a dark alley and just sit near the house and just see if anybody popped their head up or did whatever. So that's what I did. The lads had moved on and I just hid the Panda and just walked around. And sure enough, I was sitting in a hedge actually, and this head just popped up, right? And of course, next thing I know, there's a run on. I was quite fit then, so nobody got away when I was chasing them. The only thing was, I'm never going to be the tallest police officer you meet. And it always seemed to be that I was fighting with big lads. So I'm struggling with this guy as best I could as I'm shouting for help now. I'm hanging on to him for grim death. He hit us in the face. I had a black eye. My uniform was ripped and all the rest of it. But I hung on. And believe it or not, it's the first time I'd heard about odontology. He'd broken into the house, didn't admit anything, but he'd had a bite of cheese in the fridge, and we matched his teeth to the cheese to prove he'd been in the house unlawfully, and obviously he ended up getting convicted of burglary and he got 2 years in prison because he had a list of convictions previously. Now, I go back to be habits caught and taught. My staff watched how that happened. They'd never been shown how to do that previously. And from then on in, we had a method of operating that was from the team again. We'd drive to the situation, we'd drive around, but then I'd always leave 2 officers just sitting in hedges waiting, and we were successful in those sort of things. So that was a great learning process for myself, how to teach people things that they hadn't done because they were younger in service than myself. So I'm learning from the older members, but the younger members are learning from me. And that's back to my little mantra there. Good habits can be taught, but good habits can be caught. And that was a good case for me. Another incident that struck me a little bit, and this is just about how the world moves on. I followed a car with 4 individuals in. They ran away into a block of flats. And I knew, we had the concierge, we knew which flat they'd gone into. There was 4 of them. Now I just think, and again, don't forget I'm teaching as well as learning, that you can't run away from the police, because if you do it once, you do it again. So I got 3 officers, a dog handler, and we had a locksmith, and we broke into the flat. And of course, the next thing is, when we go into the front room, there was 20 young people in there. 4 run in fine, but I didn't know the other 16 were there. So now I've got 5 officers, 1 with a dog, and all the big lads always seem to want to fight with me. So I was fighting in a walk-in wardrobe, and the dog handler came to help and let the dog off, and the dog bit me, right? So I'm now fighting with somebody, the dog's biting me, we've got people all over the place, I'm looking for help. Anyway, one thing led to another, and we got it all sorted and went back to the station. And I spoke to the dog handler, and I said, John, that's not supposed to happen. I shouldn't be getting bit. He told us, he said, the dog's young, he's got to learn. I'll speak to the sergeant tomorrow. Anyway, he came back on night shift. I said, what did the sergeant say? He said he needs a bite. I said, well, he's had a bite of me. But on the same token, he meant a bite of one of the bad lads. Anyway, that same night, we had another intruder's call. We surrounded this small grass area and we arrested the burglar. I went into our custody office at the time, and this lad's standing there with blood on his arms and on his chest, and he wanted to make a complaint. He said he tried to give himself up 3 times. So I went outside, and the dog's sitting next to the dog handler, John. And I said, John, what happened? And he just patted the dog's head and he said, the dog's had his bite. That was another learning issue as well, and another way that we all learned together. Success story, we'd done the job properly, we completed the organisational objectives, and somebody who wanted to commit crime and burglary had been dealt with appropriately. Well, that's me up to my rank of sergeant. Thank you for watching or listening. I believe you're going to see me again in the future. Hopefully I'll look forward to it and you look forward to it. Thank you.